Section 16 of Great Epics in American History, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Great Epics in American History, Volume 1. Voyages of Discovery and Early Explorations, 1000 AD to 1682 by Francis Whiting Halsey. Section 16. The Voyage of Magellan to the Pacific. John Fiske's account. Our chief source of information for the events of the voyage is the journal kept by a gentleman from Vicenza, the Chevalier Antonia Pigafetta, who obtained permission to accompany the expedition, for to see the marvels of the ocean. After leaving the Canaries on the 3rd of October, the Armada ran down toward Sierra Leone and was becalmed, making only 3 leagues in 3 weeks. Then the upper air burst into life, and the frail ships were driven along under bare poles, now and then dipping their yard arms. During a month of this dreadful weather, the food and water grew scarce, and the rations were diminished. The spirit of mutiny began to show itself. The Spanish captains whispered among the crews that this man from Portugal had not their interests at heart and was not loyal to the emperor. Toward the captain general, their demeanor grew more and more insubordinate, and Cartagena one day, having come on board the flagship, faced him with threats and insults. To his astonishment, Magellan promptly collared him and sent him a prisoner in irons on board the Victoria, whose captain was unfortunately also one of the traders, while the command of the San Antonio was given to another officer. This example made things quiet for the moment. On the 29th of November, they reached the Brazilian coast near Pernambuco, and on the 11th of January, they arrived at the mouth of La Plata, which they investigated sufficiently to convince them that it was a river's mouth and not a strait. 3 weeks were consumed in this work. This course through February and March along the coast of Patagonia was marked by incessant and violent storms, and the cold became so intense that, finding a sheltered harbor with plenty of fish at Port St. Julian, they chose it for winter quarters and anchored there on the last day of March. On the next day, which was Easter Sunday, the mutiny that so long had smoldered broke out in all its fury. The hardships of the voyage had thus far been what staunch seamen called unusually severe, and it was felt that they had done enough. No one except Vespucius and Jack had ever approached so near to the South Pole, and if they had not yet found a strait, it was doubtless because there was none to find. The rations of bread and wine were becoming very short, and common prudence demanded that they should return to Spain. If their voyage was practically a failure, it was not their fault. There was ample excuse in the frightful storms they had suffered and the dangerous strains that had been put upon their worn-out ships. Such was the general feeling, but when expressed to Magellan, it fell upon deaf ears. No excuses, nothing but performance would serve his turn. For him, hardships were made only to be despised, and dangers to be laughed at, and, in short, go on there must until a strait was found or the end of that continent reached. Then they would doubtless find an open way to the Moluccas, and while he held out hopes of rich rewards for all, he appealed to their pride as Castilians. For the inflexible determination of these men was not embittered by harshness, and he could wield as well as anyone the language that soothes and persuades. At length, on the 24th of August, with the earliest symptoms of spring weather, the ships, which had been carefully overhauled and repaired, proceeded on their way. Violent storms harassed them, and it was not until the 21st of October, St. Ursula's Day, that they reached the headland still known as Cape Virgins. Passing beyond Dungeness, they entered a large open bay, which some hailed as the long-sought strait, while others averted that no passage would be found there. It was, says Pigafetta, in 18's breadth. On both the sides of this strait are Magellanos, being in some place 101 leagues in length, and in breadth some were very large, and in other places little more than half a league in breadth. On both the sides of this strait are great and high mountains covered with snow, beyond which is the entrance into the Sea of Sur. Here one of the ships stole away Piruli and returned into Spain. More than 5 weeks were consumed in passing through the strait, and among its labyrinthine twists and half-hidden bays there was ample opportunity for desertion. As advanced, reconnaissance kept reporting the water as deep and salt. The conviction grew that the strait was found, and then the question once more arose whether it would not be best to go back to Spain, satisfied with this discovery, since with all these wretched delays the provisions were again running short. Magellan's answer, uttered in measured and quiet tones, was simply that he would go on and do his work, if he had to eat the leather off the ship's yards. Upon the San Antonio there had always been a large proportion of the malcontents, and the chief pilot, Stephen Gomez, having been detailed for duty on that ship, lent himself to their purposes. The captain, Mescuta, was again seized and put in irons. A new captain was chosen by the mutineers, and Gomez piloted the ship back to Spain, where they arrived after a voyage of 6 months, and screened themselves for a while by lying about Magellan. As for that commander, in Rich Eden's words, when the Captain Magellan was past the strait and saw the way open to the other main sea, he was so glad thereof that for joy the tears fell from his eyes, and named the point of the land from whence he first saw that sea Capo Desiderato. Supposing that the ship which stole away had been lost, they erected a cross upon the top of a high hill to direct their course in the strait of it, where they chanced to come that way. The broad expanse of waters before him seemed so pleasant to Magellan after the heavy storms through which he had passed, that he called it by the name it still bears, Pacific. But the worst hardships were still before him. Once more, a sea of darkness must be crossed by brave hearts sickening with hope deferred. If the mid-Atlantic waters had been strange to Columbus and his men, here, before Magellan's people, all was thrice unknown. They were the first that ever burst into that silent sea. And as they sailed months after months over the waste of waters, the huge size of our planet began to make itself felt. Until after the middle of December, they kept a northward course near the coast of the continent, running away from the Antarctic cold. Then, northwesterly and westerly courses were taken, and on the 24th of January, 1521, a small wooded islet was found in water where the longest plummet lines failed to reach bottom. Already the voyage since issuing from the strait was nearly twice as long as that of Columbus in 1492, from the Canaries to Guanahani. From the useless island, which they called San Pablo, a further run of 11 days brought them to another uninhabited rock, which they called Tiburones, from the quantity of sharks observed in the neighborhood. There was neither food nor water to be had there, and the voyage of unknown duration, in reality not less than 5,000 English miles, was yet to be accomplished before a trace of land was again to greet their yearning gaze. Their sufferings may best be told in the quaint and touching words in which Shakespeare read them. And Hyange in this time consumed all their brisket and other victuals. They fell into such necessity that they were enforced to eat the powder that remained thereof, being now full of worms. Their fresh water was also putrefied and become yellow. They did eat skins and pieces of leather, which were folded above certain great ropes of the ships. But these skins, being made very hard by reason of the sun, rain, and wind, they hung them by a cord in the sea for the space of 4 or 5 days, to mollify them, and soothe them, and eat them. By reason of this famine and unclean feeding, some of their gums grew so out of their teeth, a symptom of scurvy, that they died miserably for hunger. And by this occasion died 19 men, and beside these that died, 25 or 30 were so sick that they were not able to do any service with their hands or arms for feebleness. So there was none without some disease. In 3 months and 20 days they sailed 4,000 leagues in one gulf by the said sea, called Pacificum, that is, peaceable, which may well be so called, for as much as in all this time, having no sight of any land, they had no misfortune of wind or any other tempest. So that in fine, if God of his mercy had not given them good weather, it was necessary that in this so great a sea they should all have died for hunger, which nevertheless they escaped so hardly that it may be doubted whether such like voyage may be attempted with so good success. One would gladly know, albeit Pigafetta's journal and the still more laconic pilot's logbook leave us in the dark on this point. How the ignorant and suffering crews interpreted this everlasting stretch of sea vast, said Maximilian Transylvanus, than the human mind could conceive. To them it may well have seemed that the theory of a round and limited earth was wrong after all, and that their infatuated commander was leading them out into the fathomless abysses of space, with no welcoming shore beyond. But that heart of triple bronze, we may be sure, did not flinch. The situation had got beyond the point where mutiny could be suggested as a remedy. The very desperateness of it was all in Magellan's favor, for so far away had they come from the known world that retreat meant certain death. The only chance of escape lay in pressing forward. At last, on the 6th of March, they came upon islands inhabited by savages ignorant of the bow and arrow, but expert in handling their peculiar light boats. Here the dreadful sufferings were ended, for they found plenty of fruit and fresh vegetables besides meat. The people were such eager and pertinacious thieves that their islands received the name by which they are still known, the Isles de Ladrones, or Isles of Robbers. On the 16th of March, the 3 ships arrived at the islands, which some years afterward were named Philippines, after Philip II of Spain. Though these were islands unvisited by Europeans, yet Asiatic traders from Siam and Sumatra, as well as from China, were to be met there, and it was thus not long before Magellan became aware of the greatness of his triumph. He had passed the meridian of the Moluccas and knew that these islands lay to the southward within an easy sail. He had accomplished the circumnavigation of the earth through its unknown portion, and the remainder of his route lay through seas already traversed. An erroneous calculation of longitudes confirmed him in the belief that the Moluccas, as well as the Philippines, properly belonged to Spain. Meanwhile, in these Philippines of themselves, he had discovered a region of no small commercial importance. But his brief tarry in these interesting islands had fatal results, and in the very hour of victory the conqueror perished, slain in a fight with the natives, the reason of which we can understand only by considering the close complication of commercial and political interests with the religious notions so common in that age. Meanwhile, on the 16th of May, the little Victoria, with starvation and scurvy already thinning the ranks, with fore-topmast gone by the board and foreyard badly sprung, cleared the Cape of Good Hope, and thence was borne on the strong and friendly current up to the equator, which she crossed on the 8th of June. Only 50 years since Santarem and Escobar, first of Europeans, had crept down that coast and crossed it. Into that glorious half-century, what a world of suffering and achievement had been crowned. Dire necessity compelled the Victoria to stop at the Cape Verde Islands. Her people sought safety in deceiving the Portuguese with the story that they were returning from a voyage in Atlantic waters only, and thus their succeeded in buying food. But while this was going on, as a boatload of 13 men had been sent ashore for rice, some silly tongue, loosened by wine in the head of a sailor who had clubs to sell, babbled the perilous secret of Magellan and the Moluccas. The 13 were at once arrested, and the boat called upon the Victoria, with direful threats to surrender, but she quickly stretched every inch of her canvas and got away. This was on the 18th of July, and 8 weeks of ocean remained. At last, on the 6th of September, the 30th anniversary of the day when Columbus weighed anchor for Cipango, the Victoria sailed into the Guadalquivir with 18 gaunt and haggard survivors to tell the proud story of the first circumnavigation of the earth. The voyage thus ended was doubtless the greatest feat of navigation that has ever been performed, and nothing can be imagined that would surpass it, except a journey to some other planet. It has not the unique historic position of the first voyage of Columbus, which brought together two streams of human life that had been disjoined since the glacial period, but as an achievement in ocean navigation. That voyage of Columbus sinks into insignificance by the side of it, and when the earth was a second time encompassed by the greatest English sailor of his age, the advance in knowledge, as well as the different route chosen, had much reduced the difficulty of the performance. When we consider the frailness of the ships, the immeasurable extent of the unknown, the mutinies that were prevented or quelled, and the hardships that were endured, we can have no hesitation in speaking of Magellan as the Prince of Navigators. Nor can we ever fail to admire the simplicity and purity of that devoted life, in which there is nothing that seeks to be hidden or explained away. End of section 16.